Hi, I'm Dennis McCuistion, and we're talking about income inequality, myth or reality. To many people, income inequality is reality. I'm going to start with the Economist magazine, who said in 2020 that the rich world is high in inequality and it's getting worse. Then there's Senator Bernie Sanders, and he put it in a unique way. He said the obscene and rising level of wealth and income inequality is unsustainable, immoral, and un-American. And then, of course, there's the Pew Institute, very respected group, and they said that average hourly wages haven't increased in 45 years. And then finally, the Council on Foreign Relations put it this way: income and wealth inequality is higher in the United States than anywhere in the world, and it is rising. Now, those perspectives are what we would call the mainstream comments on income inequality, but is that a reality? Is that perspective accurate? Here in the studio with me is former Senator Phil Gramm, who's going to talk about his new book, and it's entitled The Myth of American Inequality, How Government Biases Policy Debate. Senator, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Dennis.
And before we get started, Senator, I'm going to tell you that you and I knew a very important economist, the late Steve Pavich. And I also would tell that viewer that, Senator, you had a real job before you became a politician. You were an economist, and you taught at Texas A&M with Steve Pavich. I'd like to dedicate this program to Steve because he was not only a mentor of mine in economics, but he was also a longtime board member of the Foundation for Responsible Television. So with that said, Senator, tell that audience why you wrote this book, why you and your co-authors wrote it, and what you were trying to accomplish.
Well, first of all, Dennis, thank you very much, and thank you for dedicating the program to Steve Pavich. He was a great human being, and I love Steve Pavich. I wrote the book because there's a fundamental problem with America's measure of well-being. In terms of household income, which is the fundamental basis for our calculation of income, inequality, and poverty, that number is based on a measure that the Census Bureau has been calculating since 1947. In 1947, when they started the measure, there weren't many fringe benefits, there weren't many payments in kind, so they counted just cash payments. And in 1947, that was a good approximation. But since that time, you've got more and more benefits paid to private employees in fringe benefits like health insurance, a business contribution to retirement. And you've got more and more benefits paid in transfer payments that are paid in kind. And so when we went back and reconstructed all this, what we found is that the Census Bureau today counts only about 2/3 of all transfer payments as income to people who receive the transfers. For example, they don't count food stamps where you get a debit card that you use to go to the grocery store to buy food. They don't count rent subsidies where government pays your rent. They don't count Medicaid where government pays your medical bills. They don't take taxes into account, so they don't count refundable tax credits where you get a check from the Treasury. And of course, on the other end of the income distribution, they don't take taxes into account at all. So we found if you take government statistics, everything we're using is from some government agency. If you take government statistics and you count the value of all the transfer payments, 100 government transfer payments that pay over $100 million of benefits are not counted in the measure of household income. When you count all those and you count taxes as income lost, whereas the Census Bureau says the ratio of the top 20% of income earners to the bottom 20% is 16.7 to 1, we show it's only 4 to 1. Now, 4 to 1 may be too much, but the point is the big difference between 4 to 1 and 16.7 to 1. We also
Yeah, let me stop you there for a second, Senator, because I think you make an important point. But I want that viewer to understand the gravity of the situation, because would it be fair to say that folks like the people I quoted before and the basic mainstream media, when they talk about income inequality, they're using government statistics, which in your opinion and those of your authors does not include all of the income that the lower quintiles get, nor does it take away the taxes that the upper part pays. And so it's much more compressed in terms of income inequality than what the official statistics say today. Is that correct?
That's correct. And look, the Census Bureau in the footnotes explains what it's doing, and it also explains what the data should not be used for as a result of what they're doing, but they go ahead and use it for that purpose anyway. So that basically, not only is the distribution of income that they show 4 times the reality in terms of differential, the poverty rate is not 12.5%, but about 2.5%. And the talk where you were talking before about the growth in income inequality, when you take into account all transfer payments as income to people that got the payment, and you take taxes as income lost to people who paid the taxes, income inequality is actually lower today than it was in 1947. And that's basically what this book is about. I don't remember
seeing that anywhere written except in your book. And let me ask the folks to put up graphic 2.1, because I think it makes
2.1
a point. And 2.1, yeah. And while they're doing that, Senator, I'm going to say that this book, and I recommend that each of you buy his book, it's got a lot of numbers in it. It's got a lot of statistics in it. You quoted Mark Twain, and that quote often comes from Josh Billings. It says, it's not what we know that's a problem, what we don't know that's a problem, it's what we know that ain't so. And also it was Mark Twain who sort of gets the credit for there are 3 types of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. And so let me just say your book, Senator, has a bunch of statistics in it for whatever that's worth. So tell us about what this graph says and what that viewer should know about it.
All right, so first of all, to get from the Census Bureau number to reality, there are a bunch of private sector income things that aren't counted by the census that need to be counted. For example, all fringe benefits are not counted. Capital gains are not counted. So we add those in. Then we add the value of all transfers, not the it's only the transfers that people got, not the cost of making the transfer. We take that out. And then when we subtract taxes that people pay, what we find in the graph, if people can see the graph, is that the transfers net of taxes for lower income people raises their income dramatically, and that transfers minus taxes lowers the income of upper income individuals dramatically. And whereas the census says the ratio of the top 20 to the bottom 20 is 16.7 to 1, we show using government statistics that it's actually 4 to 1. So that's a dramatic difference.
I think okay, good. I like that. Now then, you use, that graph has something in your other graphs that you use in the book. Break down the income into quintiles. Tell that viewer what these quintiles are and why they're so important.
Well, first of all, the bottom 20% of income earners, when the war on poverty started in 1967, got $9,700 of real purchasing power income in transfer payments from federal, state, and local government. By 2017, 50 years later, that number had grown to $45,400. And yet the official poverty measure had simply oscillated between 11% and 16%, had not really changed in 50 years. So you ask yourself, how can you increase the amount of transfer payments to low-income people fivefold and not change the poverty rate? Well, the reason is you're not counting the transfer payments, or 2/3 of them. And so when you do count them, the poverty rate has come down dramatically. And when you do count them in taxes,
here's one of the things that I found interesting. It is often conservatives like yourself. You were a Democrat when you were elected to the House originally, and then you changed to a Republican, as I recall, years ago. But often the conservatives will say, we've had this war on poverty. We've paid out all this money, transfer payments, as you call, and yet poverty is still this high. You're telling me that actually that war on poverty made a significant difference. Is that true?
It's made a significant difference in eliminating want and need. It also had a significant negative impact on work. When the poverty program started in 1967, 68% of the bottom 20% of income earners worked. 68%. 50 years later, 36% work. So that we basically eliminated need, but we did it at a price of idleness. And so is that success? Well, it wasn't the goal of Franklin Roosevelt. It wasn't the goal of Lyndon Johnson. But there's no doubt about the fact that except for about 2.5% of the population that because of mental illness and drug abuse can't take care of themselves and the people they're supposed to take care of, we have statistically eliminated poverty in America.
All right, so let me also ask you to think about with that viewer right now, the idea that today we have a significantly low unemployment figure, but there's so many people who are no longer in the workplace. Now, we did a program a few weeks ago that talked about why people are no longer in the workplace. Old people like you and I are retiring. But what you're saying, I think, is there's a lot of people who aren't working because it's more in their benefit to get paid to do nothing. Am I right?
Yeah, look. We show in the book that if you're in the bottom quintile of income earners and you're low skilled, you're as well off not working as you would be after taxes by working. So should we blame people for not working? They are acting rationally in terms of their short-term interests. I think we should blame the government program. And one of the recommendations... Go ahead.
Yeah. One other thing that you talk about in your book that sort of distorts the numbers is how particularly the price indices work, whether it's a CPI or the PCE. Talk a bit about that and how that may have helped skew things.
Yeah, well, first of all, when you hear this stuff, people hadn't had a raise in 40 years. They're counting one wage index that doesn't take into account fringe benefits. Well, 25% of your income is now fringe benefits. So when you add in the value of health insurance, what your employer pays for retirement, you change that dramatically. Secondly, the price index that is used to deflate wages is the least efficient and least accurate price index of the 5 official indexes. If you use the most accurate index, wages have increased dramatically over the last 50 years.
Okay, as I say, I know that that's something that you guys are trying to get across. And I found it interesting in your book, you sort of say this in the beginning and also at the end, that the reason to write this book and the reason to put the information out there is not to end the debate about income inequality, but to really start it. Now, what do you mean by that?
I mean, look, one of the reasons I think that we can't reach any kind of bipartisan agreement is that we're talking past each other because of a difference in assessment of the facts. The reality in America is it's like Bernie Sanders went to bed, went to sleep, and dreamed that we had a welfare state. He woke up and we have a welfare state. What we ought to be debating is not more money to spend on poverty or poverty programs, but how to help the people who really need help without destroying their incentive to help themselves. We ought to be talking about, do we really need this huge bureaucracy to provide over 100 different welfare programs? Is there a better way to do this? We're not trying to end the debate. We're trying to start a debate as to, given the amount of money we're spending, people are not as well off as they ought to be.
All right. And one of the other things that you mentioned is that the insidious nature of this is the more money that's transferred, the more that skews the numbers. Am I missing something there?
Well, the more money that's transferred, the more disincentive there is for lower income people and lower skilled people to work. And what has happened is that the transfer payments in real dollars have grown faster than the income of middle income Americans, especially income after taxes. And so you got a situation now where the bottom 60% of all American earners basically have very similar earnings, even though only 36% of the prime work age people in the bottom quintile work, and almost 90% of the people in the middle income quintile work, which is an injustice.
All right, let's look at your graphic number 4.1, and on there you have each of those quintiles. And if you would explain to that viewer exactly what that is, I think it's fairly self-explanatory, but not totally. So just hit the highlights of that graph, if you would.
Yeah, look, if you look at the bottom quintile, what has happened is the amount of money in real terms that they actually earn has declined because of a decline in the labor force participation rate, but the transfer payments in real dollars have exploded, so that the bottom quintile has had its real income grow faster than any other quintile of income distribution. The second quintile has had earnings go up and down, but transfer payments have exploded. The middle quintile has basically paid taxes and earned benefits, and then the fourth and the top quintile have basically seen their tax burden rise.
All right.
And
well, that gives, that in that Council on Foreign Relations quote I mentioned, that was a recent article of theirs, and one of their solutions was to make our tax code more progressive. Well, how progressive is our tax code now?
We have the most progressive tax code in the world. High-income people pay a larger percent of the tax burden relative to their income than any other country on earth by a substantial margin. And you mentioned earlier, Dennis, about how income distribution was supposedly more skewed in America than it is in other developed countries. That is only because the Census Bureau does not provide data on most of these transfer payments to OECD. We show in the book that if they had included all of the data, that we would fall right in the middle of the 7 richest countries.
All right. Now, one of these solutions that's put out there by the folks who think that the reality is income inequality is to raise the top level. And you've got a graphic number 7.3, which we'll put up, and that shows the top tax bracket from about 1960 up until today versus what's actually paid. Can you explain that graph to our viewer?
Yeah, look. Basically, what the graph shows is that the top tax bracket, which was 90% in 1960, had so many deductions and so many credits that the top 1% of earners paid only about 18% of their income on average in income-based taxes. And as you can see, when John Kennedy brought the tax rate down to 70%, the percentage that was paid in taxes by the top 1% and top 10% didn't change significantly. And when Reagan brought the tax rate down, you can see that the percentage of income being paid in taxes today by the top 1% is higher than it has been in any year since 2000, which is when we had all that sell-off of tech stocks and huge capital gains. So the point of this is that when people say, well, look, when John Kennedy was president, the rate was 90%, and now it's down to 37%, that is in no way reflective of taxes that people have actually paid. In fact, when this rate was 90%, there were only a handful of people in the whole country that filed tax returns that paid rates at 90%. As John Kennedy said, people are not paying this rate, but they're cutting back production and becoming more inefficient to avoid paying the rate, and therefore we ought to reduce the rate to produce full employment. And he was absolutely right.
One of the other arguments that folks would say is that today, once you get in that bottom quintile of the second quintile, you can't get out. We talk about mobility of whether people can start making a lower wage and then move up or down. And I think you have graphic number 8.3 that may address that. So we'll put that up. And if you would tell us what that graphic means, it would be helpful.
Well, what this shows is if someone, and let's just start with the bottom quintile. What is the probability that a child that grows up in the bottom quintile as an adult earns more real income or has more real income than their parents did in the household they grew up in? 93%. In the second quintile, it's 86, 88 in the middle, 85 in the fourth, and 70% in the top quintile. And why is that the case? Because in the last 50 years, income in America has doubled, and so now almost 65% of Americans have real income levels that would have put them in the top 20% 50 years ago.
Okay. And finally, because we're out of time, give us just a bit of what you think the solution should be to make sure that everybody understands the real facts so that we can have public policy that may be better than what we've had in the past.
What we need to do is to require that the census count all transfer payments as income to people who get the transfer and count all taxes as income lost and redo all these statistics so we can get our facts straight. The Bible says, ye shall know the truth and the truth will make you free, but you got to know the truth before it can make you free. We just want to get our facts straight.
All right. You get the facts straight. Hopefully public policy will be, let's just say, more effective. Phil, thank you so much for being with us. We really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
what you and your co-authors have done, and I know all of our viewers do too. Now, as I mentioned to you throughout the program, this book that Phil Gramm and his co-authors wrote is not a suspense novel. It's not a detective novel. It is a very serious public policy debate and statistics about what the situation is presently and how it's not being counted properly. Now, I suspect, if you're like me, that once this book is out there and this television program is out there for a while, there will be people who will say, well, yes, but, that's not the way it is. It's really ought to be this way. We tried to get someone to come on to talk with Phil Gramm and me about this issue, but weren't able to get it because of scheduling times. We will have other people on this program to talk about income inequality with probably a different perspective, so you'll want to watch that as well. But for right now, I think the key thing is this. If we in fact have the wrong facts about any public policy issue, then we are going to be hard pressed to make good decisions. I've said to people a lot in my life who've asked me what they think I should do. And I said, look, I've got a hard time figuring out what I should do myself as opposed to telling you what you should do. But government, by definition, is in the business of telling us what is in our best interest from time to time, whether we like it or not. But if they're using the wrong statistics, they're using the wrong information, they have the wrong perspectives, then by definition, we're going to get wrong policies. Our goal here, as I've said from the beginning, and is to provide you with unique perspectives, always about things that matter, and always with people like you who care. Thank you for joining us.